Gmar Tov, Shabbat Shalom. One of my friends dared me, can you ruin a sermon with 4 words? Let's have at it. There's no more Kiddush. To quote Roger Waters, let's go Mets. Oh, that's 3. I love lobster more. Skibbity El Riz, Ohio, bro. Thank you for the one person who is under the age of 30. Thank you for the one 16-year-old who got that. Great. There are 4 words, however, that are the ultimate sermon killer. You should vote for. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Wait, Steve Score over here is actually feigning a medical emergency. And it won't work. We have a lot of doctors in this show. But let me reassure him and you, I will not be telling you who to vote for in the upcoming November election. First of all, that's not how I see my role as a rabbi. I am an expert in Jewish values, but not American politics. So it's my job to tell you what the Torah, the Talmud, Jewish philosophers might have us think or ask about an issue. But that is a long way from picking a candidate. Second, it is actually against the law for me to use the pulpit to endorse candidates. And third, and perhaps the most relevant, most of you aren't interested because you have already made up your minds. Maybe you are wildly enthusiastic. You have signs on your lawn, bumper stickers on your cars, or maybe you feel ambivalent and you are going to go and vote with one hand on the lever of the voting machine and the other holding your nose. But I would actually note that this year, in a way that I have never seen before, I have people coming up to me and asking my opinion on this question. Now, it's always nice when someone cares what I think just in general, but it comes up, people text me, message me, come up to me at events, at dinner. And so I think there's a feeling amongst our people that while every election matters, that this one is particularly impactful to the future of the Jewish people, of Israel. And so I want to answer the question, but not in the way that it was asked. And since, by the way, I'll remind you this is Yom Kippur, and we are approaching in just a few minutes, many minutes, I don't know, the Yizkor service, I hope that I can share some lessons that will take us far beyond this November in how we think about being part of a society, in how we support our brothers and sisters around the world, and how we think about all of the choices that we must make. So most of us think that representative democracy started with the Greeks. But if you've ever seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding and the dad, Gus Bartokoulos, I'm going to pull a reverse on him and say the Greeks got it from us. The earliest references to choosing representatives in our tradition actually go all the way back to the Bible. Now, nobody voted for Moses. But at Jethro's advice, Moses chooses. Moshe Yivchar, Vayivchar Moshe. Moses chooses hundreds, thousands of representatives. And in Exodus 35:30, Moses declares to the people, see, God has called by name Bezalel to take charge of the building of the tabernacle. And yet, the Talmud explains that God actually asked Moses, so is Bezalel, does he work for you? And Moses says, look, God, if you like him, who am I to complain? And God said, nevertheless, go and tell Israel and ask their opinion. And from this we know that a leader may never be appointed over the community unless they approve. The idea that leaders serve at the consent not just of God, but of the nation is strong in other places in the Bible. In Deuteronomy 17, we are told that the people are free, are even encouraged to appoint a king. But then later on, the very first king that they appoint, Saul, is removed, and it is with the assent of the people that David is chosen as his successor. And history repeats as again and again, the Jews, the Israelites chose who would be their leader. Our sages, the rabbis in the Talmud, were also very big on voting. Frequently in the Talmud, the sages would decide matters of law based on majority vote. And many of you know there's a famous story of the oven of Aknai, and there are 3 sages who rule one way, and Rabbi Eliezer rules the other way, and they outvote him 3-1, and he says, let all of these miracles prove that I am right. Let the walls of the Beit Midrash, let the tree be uprooted, let the river flow the other way. And finally, God himself, God says, the law is like Rabbi Eliezer. The rabbis say, the point still passes, now it's 3-2. Our tradition in Deuteronomy 30 tells us, "Hachayim v'hamavet natati lefanecha habracha v'aklala, uvacharta b'chayim." I have put before you life and death, blessings and curses, uvacharta, vachar, choose life. Or perhaps uvacharta v'chayim, and choose in life, with life. I want to point out that modern Israel is a continuation of those themes and even an expansion. It is a vibrant democracy, the only one for hundreds of miles in any direction, and yet still drawing on these ancient values. In Israel, elections take place every 5 years, or whenever someone feels like it, and they are called bechirot, the very same word used to describe how Moses chose worthy leaders. The same word that God uses to tell us to choose life is the word that describes what Israelis do when they go to the ballot box. And by the way, the word that is used in Hebrew to name the ballot box in Israel is a kalpi, which has a very ancient connection to this day of Yom Kippur. It actually appears in our tradition for the first time in the tractate Yoma in the Mishnah, one of the earliest texts that describe how Yom Kippur was observed in ancient times. The ritual of Yom Kippur was that there were 2 identical goats brought before the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. And he had to make a choice of incredible import. One of the goats would be brought before the Lord to the tabernacle to be an offering. And the other would stand alive, Ya'amod Chai, in life, and be sent off into the wilderness as a scapegoat. Though to be fair, by the end of the day, that goat would also be significantly less alive. In order for the Israelites to attain atonement, the right goat had to be chosen for each role. And the vessel in which those lots were cast was called a kalpi. That same vessel that is used, modern Israelis, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Arab, Druze, religious, secular, you name it, that they use to freely choose their leaders, takes its name from the implement used by the high priest to choose the goats. Some Israelis today might prefer the goats. Voting, however, is a sacred ritual. Now, as it turns out, I dug a little further. The word kalpi actually comes from the Greek, so you win this round, Partoculus. But the point remains. And by the way, our sources tell us that it is not only the leaders of Israel, of our Jewish community, that we need to worry about, but the civic life of the places where we all live. Jeremiah conveyed God's word to the exiles in Babylonia, commanding them, "Seek the welfare of the city to which I've exiled you, and pray on its behalf, for its peace is your peace." Now that's all lovely. So am I going to tell you who to vote for in an election whose early voting starts on Tuesday, and if we are lucky will actually end 3 weeks later? Again, no. But let me tell you that you should vote for, and let me explain what I mean. We don't get to pick when the election is. We don't get to pick usually who's running. We don't choose whether we get to choose, or even who we get to choose from. But choosing itself is a gift, and we can choose how we choose. So when we come to a point of choice, in election or any other choice in life, we can vote against. We can vote from a place of negativity. We can fall prey to propaganda. We can vote to break, not to build. We can demonize the people who make a different choice. One of the goats the high priest chose, I mentioned, was the scapegoat, upon whom all of the sins and wrongs and errors of the people were cast. It is so easy to say, whatever it is those people's fault. I'm going to vote against them. Or you can vote for. You can vote in a way that reflects uvacharta, choosing b'chaim, with life. You can vote life, you can choose in a way that is lively, not in a way that's Pollyannish or wishful, but in a way that considers opportunities, that recognizing that even those voting on the other side are just plain wrong, that they are doing it from a place of sincerity, and they may have ideas of value to offer. So how do you vote for? First of all, be thoughtful consumers of information. Watch multiple media outlets. I thought I could trust Bluestein. There is no dearth of advocacy out there. And by the way, for as many congregants who ask my opinion, there are 5 more who want to make sure that I'm aware of theirs and forward me all kinds of stuff. And by the way, I do something very intentional in my social media. My Instagram account thinks I'm a Democrat. My X account thinks I'm a Republican. Facebook thinks I need new gutters and a sexy Halloween costume. I don't even want to know what she said. I'm wearing it. But that's sort of the point. The goal of these algorithms is to get you riled up, not informed, is to bring you further into whatever hole you have dug yourself into. And so most people operate in an echo chamber where they only get the information that takes them further down the rabbit hole they are already in. Now, by the way, in some cases, this is not just the algorithm, it's intentional. There are researchers who have proved that TikTok's algorithm is weighted against Israel, and former employees have blown the whistle that their teams are actually acting against Israel. And by the way, the ability to misinform has grown exponentially. With AI, you can generate audio of anyone saying anything. You can generate pictures of anything you want. There is a picture circulating right now on the internet of my office looking clean. After Jeremiah asks the people to support the city in which they were exiled, to be active in civic life, he warns them, "Let not the prophets and the diviners in your midst deceive you, and pay no heed to the dreams they dream." We need to listen to that prophecy today. Now, by the way, you will have people tell you, that candidate over there has people who are in their corner who are really nasty anti-Semites, who are terrible, who are violent. And by the way, those people are right. You may have people tell you that that candidate over there has some people in their corner who are nasty anti-Semites, who are terrible, who are violent. And guess what? They're also right. There are some differences. The people who admire Nazis and think we control the weather with lasers tend to vote one way. The people who call us Nazis and accuse us of genocide tend to lean the other. Though, to be fair, some of the greatest fans of Intifada are voting for a candidate named Jill Stein, who is actually Jewish. What are you going to do? When it comes down to it, the one issue that unites the worst people in this election is hating us. But by the way, it's not all bad. I can declare with 100% confidence that the next president of the United States will have either a Jewish spouse and stepchildren or Jewish daughter and son-in-law. Both parties gave families of hostages an incredibly prominent place and voice at their conventions. And by the way, both major candidates and their proxies will tell you that they stand with us. And you have to decide who has the best plan, not just who says it better, and also who you think will follow through in the face of whatever may unfold. And by the way, I have to note that there are truly deep divides in Israel's society and Israeli politicians about what paths their country should take. And so if serious lovers of Israel who live there can disagree so vehemently, there has to be space for those of us who really care about Israel on this side of Atlantic to disagree as well. There are definitely wrong answers, but there may be more than one good one. Each of us sitting in this room probably has an idea as to what the best outcome might be of the November election. Maybe Israel is the first and only issue on your mind, or maybe you're concerned about other things, about immigration, the environment, healthcare, abortion, taxation, economic policy, all of the other foreign policy questions out there. Or maybe you actually are willing to lean back a little bit on the issues, but you care about character, you care about experience. And I'm going to say something that really should not be controversial. Vote for the candidate who you think is actually best. I would argue that the most important outcome of this election that we need to look for, by the way, is actually that there is an outcome, and that we managed to have another one in 2028. And by the way, I think that is true even if you think Israel is your first and only issue, because if you feel that America needs to be Israel's strong ally, America has to be functional in order to do that. A government that is ineffective, that is shut down, that is worrying about the wrong things, can't support Israel politically, and can't resupply Israel with what it needs to continue its necessary defense. I am concerned that nationally this election will be accompanied by conspiracy theories, by threats of violence against poll workers and vote counters. Here in Georgia, we could be in for quite a circus. And if we don't figure out how to agree on and accept election results, nobody wins. Everybody loses. There may be some tough times and some hard work of keeping the peace that starts on November 6th. I am confident there will be litigation. I am fairly sure there will be protests, but there could be more. Our community needs to be ready. And perhaps we even can play a critical role as a bridge, talking to our neighbors, lowering the temperature. You could sign up to be a poll watcher or election monitor, to be an unbiased, honest presence, to be able to tell your neighbors, no, I was there, I saw. Which brings me to an important subpoint. It's not just that what is good for America is good for the Jews, which I think is true, but in fact, what I am learning is that what is good for the Jews is actually good for America. At one time, Jews in America overwhelmingly allied themselves with one party. And over the last decade, those lines have continued to shift. The more to the left or the right you are religiously, the more likely your political approach is the same. And that's not a terrible thing, because as long as America is divided into two parties, it is important that we have relationships and allies, or at least bedfellows, on both sides of the aisle. And so whatever party you support, your job is not to say how terrible the other party is for the Jews or for whatever. Your obligation is to advocate within your orbit. And by the way, there are other races besides president and vice president. And for many of those races, November is now irrelevant. Most races that involve a district, Congress, statewide, are no longer competitive. Out of 435 Congress people who are going to be elected in November, There are maybe 70 where the outcome is realistically up for grabs. And I hear that none of them are in Georgia. So the key decisions in those races, and those races are important because the people in Congress are the ones who decide whether Israel gets aid. They're the ones who decide whether there is security support funding for synagogues. Really, anything you care about, 435 people in Washington have to vote on. And the choice is made for you, not when you vote in November, but by a relatively small number of people who voted in primaries in May. So if you want to make a real difference, be thinking in January through May, not just November. If you get started early enough, you get to choose when to choose, and you get to choose what the choices are. For many years, AIPAC was an organization which, despite the PAC in its name, engaged in advocacy but never officially endorsed candidates. Their motto was, we're going to work with whoever was in office. And recently they changed tack and they started getting active in actually supporting candidates in primaries. I was skeptical about this. I don't give to political campaigns. I don't give to PACs. But I have to say I appreciate what they did, because they went up against two of the most anti-Israel members of the Democratic squad and are sending them home. They helped a Republican in Texas fight off a neo-Nazi challenger and held off another Republican candidate who had written anti-Semitic articles. Remember, the folks who are against us tend to be on the extremes. So anything that brings Americans, that brings American politics back to the center is good for us and decreases the chances that we have another civil war here. I would like to see a country where people have real and honest disagreements about how to handle tough issues. And different sides are represented because in Judaism we believe that thoughtful discussion, that advocating and listening, and even voting is how you get the best outcomes. I want a country where representatives, different parties, have lunch together and hash it out. There are a few times in the Talmud where the system broke down. The Talmud tractate Shabbat describes a time when the house of Shammai planted a sword in the Beit Midrash and threatened to kill, or maybe even did kill, their opponents. After all, one person, one vote. One less person, one less vote. The Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 580 actually records that the anniversary of that day is a minor fast day. And in the end, that technique did not work. Because if you know Jewish law, you know that almost all of the time, the law follows Hillel. In part because whenever they cited the law, they always considered the other views first. So, ruin a sermon in 4 words. For the next hour, when I say you should vote for, what I mean is that you should choose how you choose, and you should choose why you choose. Yes, go vote on November 5th. It's the same date for both parties, despite what people may be posting. Get past the disinformation. But more than that, be ready to be a voice for civil society on November 6th. Get involved, get engaged in the way that you can have a real impact. The elections of 2026 are going to be decided in 2025. So that when you show up in November 2026 or 2028, God willing, there's a place to show up and vote. You are not voting out of fear or resignation or the lesser of two evils, but for candidates you feel good voting for. There are plenty of times when we may feel like we are limited in our choices, but at the very least we can choose how to choose. I mentioned on Rosh Hashanah the challenges of having kids on college campuses. And each of us who is in that struggle, and indeed as a community, we have to decide, are we going to withdraw? Are we going to cede higher education to radical faculty, to protesters wearing masks? Or are we going to engage? Are we going to get involved in organizations like Alums for Campus Fairness and fight to make campuses safe for Jewish kids? Are we going to reach out to Hillel and Chabad and make sure they have the resources that they need to make sure that Jewish kids on campus are supported and strong and safe? On this Yom Kippur, Israel faces so many choices it did not ask for. And you can say that Israel, let me take a step back. Last night I spoke about marriage, and I was talking to someone who had been married 3 times and was doing it 4th. I'm really good at being married. No, you're really good at getting married. For a number of years, Israel was either really very good or very bad at having elections because it had one every year. Now, Israel has had a government that has lasted for 2 years, but in some ways is still hanging by a thread and faces tough choices. It would be my greatest dream if we could destroy Hamas, because we know that if they are allowed to grow back, that they will do their best to reenact October 7th, the rockets, the rape, the torture, the murder. They've said so. And yet I also want so badly to bring each of our hostages home. And I am afraid that it is going to be very hard, if not impossible, to accomplish both. There are divides within Israeli society, leaders and citizens alike, that were put aside on October 7th and have now reemerged nucleated around the dilemma of which goals do we prioritize, and painful questions of whether coalition politics are taking precedence over what is best for the country. And though those conflicts are painful, they are a testimony to the fact that Israel remains a vigorous and strong democracy where people have a voice, and we cannot forget that, and we cannot let other people forget that. Israel is the only place in the Middle East where Arabs, where Muslims have a say in how they are ruled. On the other hand, there are some choices that we get to make about Israel. Because I don't vote in the Knesset elections, and by the way, as someone who is not under rocket fire, who does not have to run to a shelter, whose children don't serve in uniform, I don't have a family member, only those who I care for as such, who are being held captive in hell. So I can't presume to tell Israel how to make its tough choices. But there are some choices we do get to make, where choosing is not only our right, but maybe even our responsibility. There's an election coming up in the spring throughout the Jewish world that everyone in this room should vote in. The World Zionist Organization was started by Theodor Herzl in 1897 as a way for Jewish communities around the world to figure out how to reestablish a Jewish homeland. Once the state was founded, its government took on many of the WZO's roles. But the Congress remains active as the way that Jews around the world can have a voice in what's happening in Israel. My grandparents were in the World Zionist Congress. My father was in the World Zionist Congress. I have not managed to figure out the Nepo baby thing myself. But to this day, it is the way that we have a voice. Because the WZC and the WZO, through an alphabet soup of organizations, they decide how much of the money that you send to Israel through Federation, through JNF, is spent, and it determines the policies that determine how Israel interacts with us. The WZC decides, will the money we spend be spent rebuilding towns and villages decimated on October 7th, or on other things? Will Israel be a place that is welcoming to all kinds of Jews, or only some? Some of that money is spent on education and outreach in our communities. For example, the Shinshinim who serve in our community, that money is determined by the WZC. So the WZC is how we determine how we are served. That election doesn't happen until the spring, but we're already ramping up to make sure that Merkaz, which is the group within WDC that represents us, has a strong voice, that we have a choice, that we have a voice, that we have a vote. So if you want to come help, come talk to me or see Julie Oceans, who's all the way in the back. We are organizing a team to make sure that we are represented. The same ways that we think about voting have a lot in common with the ways we think about all the decisions we make in our lives. Sometimes we are enthusiastic about the choices we are given. Other times we may feel like we are picking between sea salt and caramel chopped liver and pumpkin spice gefilte fish. We have to make choices all the time in our education, our careers, our relationships. What would it mean in each of those spheres for us to choose positively, to choose for? To look at new opportunities with skepticism, with realism, but with the desire, the hope of coming to a positive. To look not only at the strikes in the negative column, but at the check marks for. There are a lot of ways to ruin a sermon in 4 words. With my weather laser, I'll continue in Aramaic. But there are 3 words that will redeem any sermon. So, in conclusion, I have been encouraging you on this Yom Kippur to vote for, to choose life. There comes a point in each of our lives where that choice is taken from us. Through our life choices, we may steer the manner, the moment of our death, but not its undeniable essential reality. Even when the choice of life is taken, the choice of how we approach it remains. And so in just a few moments, we are going to recite the Yizkor service. Some of us will be remembering parents, others, spouses or siblings or close friends. A few carry the unimaginable weight of remembering a child. All of us bear the burden today of remembering the martyrs of Israel, those of ancient history, and those who were murdered a year ago. Some of those lives were cruelly stolen from us, and so there is anger. In other cases, maybe we're able to feel a sense of gratitude because we know that all life is just a loan, a long-term loan, and maybe we are lucky enough to return that which we have borrowed well used. We cannot choose that life is taken from us. And by the way, we have to remember how lucky it are, how many choices we have in life. The fact that we have a chance to choose our leaders is a blessing most of our ancestors for 2,000 years never imagined. We cannot choose when life is taken from us. But even when we are given death, we still have a choice. When we face death, we can shut down, we can drown in anger and fear. We can lash out, or we can withdraw into inaction. We can break, we can bruise. Or we can, as the Yizkor service asks that we do, take the lives of those who passed as our motivation. We can see them as inspiration to finish walking the paths that they were unable to complete, to see the opportunities ahead, to enter the promised lands that they could only glimpse from the top of the mountain. The Yizkor service that we are going to recite, remembering our loved ones, remembering our martyrs, calls upon us to remember them, though their memories may be painful, and calls upon us to live on their behalf. The greater the pain, the greater the urgency of recognizing that even in the face of death, especially in the face of death, we can choose life. And so, on this day, that is the choice you have before you. And that is the one you should vote for. Gmar Chatima Tova, Shabbat Shalom.